Welcome to another episode of the Part 145 ESA training from Phoenix Way Academy. Hi, I'm Sarah.
Hi, and I'm Sam. Well, in this episode, we will continue the topic of 145 Part-A.200 Management System.
Yeah, and before we, really get into the heavy regulatory text today, I want you to just imagine a scenario.
Okay, setting the stage.
Right. So you just signed off on this massive, perfectly overhauled commercial jet engine. It's bolted to the wing, ready for hundreds of passengers.
High stakes.
Exactly. Then, like a month later, you find out the torque wrench used to tighten the critical fan blades, well, it hadn't been calibrated in 2 years.
Oh, wow. That is a nightmare.
Right. The manual was followed, the paperwork was all signed, but the actual physical reality was completely compromised. And today we are looking at the exact safety net designed to catch that nightmare before the plane ever leaves the ground. We're talking about compliance monitoring.
Yeah, because, that gap between the written procedure and the physical reality on the hangar floor, that is exactly where aviation incidents are born.
Oh, 100%.
I mean, your management system can have the most beautifully written manuals in the world, but if nobody is out there aggressively verifying that the mechanics are actually following them, you are flying completely blind.
Right. Which brings us to the mechanism that, forces your eyes open. Let's start with AMC 145.A.200 subparagraph A.6.
Okay.
This section covers compliance monitoring general. And Clause A basically states the primary objective is to monitor compliance with requirements, policies, procedures, and crucially, to request action where non-compliances are identified.
I want to focus on that phrase, request action, for a second, because honestly, the regulation is being a bit too polite with its vocabulary there.
Yeah, it's definitely not a gentle suggestion.
No, not at all. I mean, if your monitoring function catches an engineer using an expired manual, they do not just take a note on a clipboard and walk away.
Right, they actively intervene.
Exactly. They pull the fire alarm on that specific process and trigger a mandatory correction right then and there.
Yeah, and to have the authority to actually pull that alarm, you need absolute objectivity, which leads right into Clause B. It states that organizations have to ensure audits and inspections are done by personnel not responsible for the functions, procedures, or products that are audited or inspected.
Basically, the old rule of, you can't grade your own homework.
Exactly. But it goes way beyond that cliche. I mean, it's about cognitive blindness.
Oh, for sure.
Like, if a seasoned inspector just spent 8 hours battling a really stubborn landing gear assembly, psychologically, they just cannot see their own errors. Their brain will literally fill in the gaps.
Right, and there's also just that inherent instinct for self-preservation. I mean, you can't ask a department head to impartially document the failures of their own team without inviting a massive conflict of interest.
Right, so absolute independence is the baseline.
Okay, so we know they have to be independent. But how do they actually execute this audit? What does it actually look like on the floor? Do they just sit in an office looking at spreadsheets all day?
Well, that's where AMC 2, 145.A.200, subparagraph A.6 comes in. This focuses purely on the independent audit.
Okay.
Yeah, so clauses A and B define this independent audit as an essential element that has to include an objective process of routine sample checks. And that covers all maintenance standards, procedures, and product sampling.
I really like that word objective because it forces the auditor out of the office, right? They are out on the floor randomly selecting a completed engine overhaul and basically proving that the actual metal matches the manual.
Exactly. But, if they are just checking completed work during normal Tuesday morning business hours, aren't they just getting a sanitized version of the operation?
Oh, definitely. Everyone is on their best behavior when they know they're being watched.
Right. And that is the exact vulnerability that Clause C attacks. It demands an overview of all maintenance activities, and it explicitly requires a percentage of unannounced audits.
Like a surprise restaurant health inspection.
Yeah, precisely. And it goes further. If your organization runs a 24-hour operation, it states some audits should be carried out during the night.
Man, I can only imagine the friction that causes. Like a compliance auditor walking onto the floor at 2 a.m., completely unannounced. The night shift culture is historically so different from the day shift.
Oh, it's a completely different world. The lights are dimmer, fatigue is higher, and maybe people are tempted to skip a step to get the aircraft out by dawn.
Right, so the regulation kind of weaponizes that element of surprise to shatter that shadow culture.
It does. It forces consistency across the board. But, you can't just rely on random surprise attacks. You need a structured strategy, too.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so clauses D and E require an established annual audit plan. This plan has to verify all aspects of Part 145 compliance every single year, and that includes subcontractors.
But there is a little exception in Clause E. Right.
Right. It says you do not need to recheck a common procedure against every single product line, provided the procedure has been verified every year without resultant findings.
Let me push back on that for a second. So if I maintain Boeing aircraft, Airbus aircraft, and regional jets,
Yeah.
and my tool calibration procedure is completely identical for all three, Clause E says I only have to audit that procedure once. Doesn't that sort of invite complacency?
Well, it looks like a shortcut, but it's actually a bit of a trap for the organization.
A trap? How so?
Because, yes, if you have zero findings, you gain incredible efficiency. You check the calibration process once, and boom, it covers all product lines.
Okay.
But the moment an auditor finds a single out-of-calibration wrench, you lose that privilege instantly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The blast radius of that one failure means you now have to recheck the calibration procedures across the Boeing line, the Airbus line, and the regional jet line until that systemic issue is completely resolved.
Oh, so it essentially forces you to build robust universal systems because the penalty for a finding is so massive.
Exactly.
Okay, so moving from procedures to the actual hardware. Clause F dictates that you must sample check one product on each product line every year. And it doesn't let you just, glance at it from a distance.
No, it is very thorough.
Yeah, it explicitly lists 6 verification points.
Yeah.
First, the maintenance data and human factors. Second, the facility and maintenance environment. Third, the standard of inspection. Fourth, the completion of work cards. Fifth, the tools and material used. And sixth, the authorization of the personnel.
And just to give you the, mathematical reality of that rule,
Yeah.
if your facility is approved to work on aircraft engines, brakes, and autopilots, you are legally mandated to perform at least 4 complete, deeply invasive product audits every single year.
One for every distinct line.
Right.
But how invasive is invasive? Because Clause G says the audit includes testing and visual inspection, but then it specifically warns it should not involve repeated disassembly or testing unless the product audit identifies findings that require such an action.
Right.
I mean, I feel like a truly aggressive auditor would want to tear the whole unit down just to be 100% sure, right?
You'd think so, but the counterargument to that is the concept of induced maintenance error.
Oh, right.
Think about it. If you have a perfectly repaired, sealed autopilot unit that already passed all its functional tests, forcing a mechanic to tear it apart just for an audit introduces a brand new risk.
Yeah, stray washer could fall in or a seal gets pinched.
Exactly. You are there to audit the process, not to accidentally sabotage the hardware.
That is a really critical distinction. So what about external factors in scheduling, like line stations?
Good question. Clause H dictates that contracted audits must happen twice every year. And then Clause I governs line stations. Those are the remote outposts under 145.A.200 subparagraph D.
Right, the smaller setups.
Yeah. It says their audit plan is based on flight activity, but it maxes out at a 2-year interval.
So it creates a sliding scale based on exposure. Because a tiny line station seeing one flight a week has a completely different risk profile than your main international hub.
Exactly. But the regulation offers a massive incentive to organizations that actually master this system. And that brings us to Clause J.
Clause J is super interesting. It states the audit cycle can be increased by up to 100%. Meaning, you could push that line station audit out to 4 years instead of 2.
Right.
Provided there are no safety findings, a risk assessment is completed, and you have agreement from the competent authority.
Now, I know what you're thinking. Doubling the time between checks sounds incredibly reckless.
It completely sounds reckless.
Yeah.
I mean, if we know human nature generally drifts toward complacency, why reward them by looking away for a longer time?
Because it's brilliant behavioral economics.
Oh, really?
Yeah. If a facility proves over several years that their internal culture naturally rejects errors, even without the auditor breathing down their neck, the authority lets you reallocate your auditing resources to higher risk areas. Ah, I see.
It saves the organization immense time and money, and it basically proves that safety is actually profitable.
That makes a lot of sense. Provided you keep the paperwork to prove it, of course. So, wrapping up AMC2, Clause K demands the issuance of audit reports, detailing all findings and non-compliances.
Standard documentation.
Right. And then Clause L offers a lifeline for really tiny operations. If your organization has a maximum of 10 maintenance staff, you are allowed to subcontract the entire independent audit process with authority agreement.
Think about the reality of like an 8-person avionics shop. They just cannot financially support a full-time compliance manager whose only job is to sit there and watch the other 7 people work.
No, that would ruin them.
Right. Clause L prevents them from going bankrupt by allowing them to hire an approved external consultant.
But outsourcing that audit creates a massive legal vulnerability, doesn't it? Which takes us right into AMC 145.A.200, subparagraph A.6, contracting of independent audit.
Yes, it does. So Clause A points 1 and 2 state these external audits fall under the compliance monitoring manager's responsibility, and your organization must ensure the external personnel have relevant knowledge, background, and experience. Which means you cannot just bring in, a brilliant financial tax attorney or a hospital compliance officer to audit an engine overhaul shop.
Yeah, they wouldn't even know what to look for.
Exactly. If they don't understand aviation maintenance, they won't know that a specific safety wire technique is totally wrong.
And Clause B really hammers home the stakes of making a bad hire. It explicitly states, the organization retains the ultimate responsibility for the effectiveness of the compliance monitoring function, in particular for the effective implementation and follow-up of all corrective actions.
That is a foundational rule in aviation law. You can outsource the labor, but you can never, ever outsource the liability.
Yeah. If you hire a third-party auditor to save money, and they happen to miss a critical flaw in your landing gear overhaul process that later leads to an incident, the aviation authority does not go after the consultant's license.
They go after you.
Exactly. They go after your organization's Part-145 certificate. The buck stops with you.
So, okay, let's say you hire a competent auditor, they do their job, and they hand you this brutal report outlining all your non-compliances. The absolute worst thing you can do is just, file it away in a cabinet.
Oh, yeah. That defeats the whole purpose.
Right. And that is exactly why the law dictates the creation of a feedback system, which is detailed in AMC 145.A.200, subparagraph A.6.
Okay, let's break that down.
Clause A declares this system is essential. And then Clause B draws a really hard line. It says, the feedback system should not be contracted to external persons or organizations.
Wait, so we just established that small shops can outsource the audit itself. Why absolutely forbid them from outsourcing the feedback system?
Well, because an external auditor is simply a diagnostic tool.
Right.
They can tell you your engine is failing. But your own internal leadership must be the ones to actually fix the machinery and change the toxic habits that caused the failure in the first place.
Right.
You just cannot hire a consultant to artificially inject a safety culture into your workforce.
Yeah.
It has to come from inside the house.
That is a great way to put it. And that leads directly into the actual mechanics of that fix in Clause C. It mandates that you identify root cause or causes and contributing factor or factors, and it specifically references GM 145.A.95 for this.
Okay.
You also have to define corrective actions, responsible parties, and strict timelines.
This is really the difference between just treating a symptom and actually building a diagnostic tree.
Right.
Like, let's use a real example. An auditor catches a mechanic using a completely unauthorized, uncalibrated pressure gauge.
Right.
The symptom treatment is just taking the gauge away and yelling at the mechanic.
But Clause C forces you to ask why. Why did they even have it? Well, maybe the tool crib is out of stock. Okay, why is it out of stock? Because the supply chain software is corrupted and keeps rejecting tool orders.
Oh, I see.
So the root cause isn't a bad mechanic at all. The root cause is a broken IT system. You have to fix the software to actually close the finding.
And to fix that software, you need Clause D audit reports must be sent to the relevant departments giving target closure dates. But it contains a really brilliant caveat. It says those target dates should be discussed with the relevant department or departments before the compliance monitoring function confirms the dates.
I love that caveat so much because it prevents authoritarian mandates that just cause, malicious compliance.
Yeah.
If the compliance manager just marches into the IT department and demands $1 million supply chain fix by Friday, IT will just build a fake temporary workaround just to appease them.
Right, just to get them off their back.
Exactly. By forcing a negotiation on the closure date, you guarantee a realistic permanent fix.
But what happens if the IT department just refuses to cooperate entirely? That is where you bring in the heavy artillery found in Clause E. The accountable manager must review progress. Now, they can delegate daily meetings to the compliance manager, but the regulation demands two specific things. First, the accountable manager must meet senior staff at least twice per year to review the overall performance. And second, they must receive at least a half-yearly summary report on non-compliance findings.
I always call this the anti-ivory tower
Oh,
clause.
that's a good name for it.
Because, in massive corporations, the CEO, who is usually the accountable manager, often wants to distance themselves from the messy day-to-day failures on the hangar floor.
Plausible deniability.
Exactly. But this clause legally shackles them to the ugly data. If a plane goes down, they cannot stand in front of an investigating board and claim ignorance. They are legally mandated to have their finger on the pulse at least every 6 months.
And to prove that pulse is actually beating, we have Clause F. It requires all records to be retained per 145.A.200 subparagraph C, or for such periods as to support changes to the audit planning cycle, whichever is the longer.
Which ties directly back to our discussion earlier on Clause J. Remember, if you want the authority to double your audit interval and save all that money, you need a flawless multi-year paper trail proving your feedback system effectively destroyed those root causes.
Exactly. So we have built this massive, aggressive watchdog department that audits every single corner of the maintenance organization, forces root cause analysis, and reports directly to the CEO.
It's quite a system.
It is. But it creates a massive philosophical vulnerability. I mean, who monitors the monitors?
Oh, that is the ultimate closed-loop question, and it's answered by our final regulation for today, GM1 145.A.200 subparagraph A.6, titled Compliance Monitoring Function.
Okay, what does it say?
It contains one incredibly potent sentence. It says, the compliance monitoring function itself should be subject to independent monitoring of compliance in accordance with 145.A.200 subparagraph A.6.
Wait, so you literally have to audit the auditors?
Exactly. Think about a massive international airline. Their internal compliance team is incredibly powerful. But over the years, what if they get lazy? What if they start pencil whipping their own audit reports?
Right, they could just be checking boxes.
Yeah. So to satisfy GM1, that airline must hire a completely separate independent entity, often a third-party consultant, to come in and aggressively audit the compliance team's paperwork.
Wow. It ensures that absolutely no department, no matter how much authority they wield over the hangar floor, is above scrutiny. The system regulates itself from the top down, from the bottom up.
It's beautifully designed, and that basically brings us to the end of our deep dives into these specific regulations today.
Yeah, and as you process all these clauses, I really want you to think about the psychological reality of your own organization. When an independent auditor walks onto your hangar floor unannounced at 2 a.m., what is the immediate reaction?
That's the real test.
Right. Is it fear, defensiveness, and a frantic attempt to hide tools? Or is it genuinely embraced as an opportunity to pressure test the safety net? Because the EASA regulations can dictate exactly how you monitor compliance, but only your internal culture can dictate why it actually matters.
In the next episode, we will cover the last part of 145.A.200 Management System.
Once again, our episodes are up, but remember, you can find many more trending topics on our YouTube channel, Phoenix Way Academy. Hope to see you there soon, but for now, take care and goodbye.